Flynn. I'm the Director of Carbon Accountable, a co-sponsoring organization of SB 253. And I have the honor and privilege of being your MC for this program today. Woo! Awesome. You're going to hear today from business voices, legislators, and other stakeholders about the urgency of now. This is personal for me, as I know it is for many of you. Our children, our communities, and history will judge us based on what we do during these difficult times. As an attorney with a focus on climate data policy, both domestically and internationally, I decided that it was time to stop studying the problem of GHG emissions disclosure gaps and the fact that we're flying blind in a storm, and to take action. It's been over 2.5 years since Carbon Accountable approached Senator Scott Wiener about the idea of a state-based GHG corporate disclosure bill and its introduction as SB 260, as well as the climate disclosure risk bill that is now SB 261. Over that same time, it's sad to say that global GHG emissions have risen over 7%, and the 1.5 degree future that we so desperately need seems farther and farther away. You can't turn on the TV or open your app without some news of a climate devastation, wildfire, drought, a hurricane, a flood, both near and afar. At the same time, the public is growing skeptical of our efforts to decarbonize the economy, of corporate GHG net zero commitments, and shareholders and investors recognize that climate risk is financial risk. Woo! So it's no surprise that the momentum for these two game-changing bills builds here today and gives us a chance to make history. We will give corporations the data and insights they need to decarbonize. We'll give consumers and shareholders the data they need to be empowered, and we will put to bed greenwashing as a phenomenon. It's great to see all the corporations coming forward this year and the increasing efforts of advocates and grassroots organizations, of legislators showing their leadership, and for the press nationally and in the state recognizing that what's happening here in Sacramento is to be watched. It's the next big chapter in climate action, and we're super excited and honored to be part of this larger movement. So let's get going. I'd love to feature these business leaders and members and other co-sponsors as we talk about what we're going to do in these coming weeks to make sure that this promise becomes a reality. So thank you so much. First, we're going to hear from Senator Scott Wiener. He's the joint author of SB 253 and SB 261. Scott Wiener.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm so thrilled to be here today. First of all, I just really want to acknowledge my colleague, Senator Henry Stern, and also Senator Lena Gonzalez. The three of us have been partnering on both SB 253 and on SB 261 from the very beginning. I'm so grateful that for Assembly members Ward and Kalra for being here. We're going to need a strong partnership on the Assembly floor, because I'm hoping these bills will be on the Assembly floor, and it's going to be a real fight because these bills are so important for California to retain our leadership role around climate action. California has led in so many ways, and we should be leading on corporate transparency and accountability because corporate carbon emissions are a significant part of the problem that we face and part of the solution. And it is inspiring to see so many corporations coming forward more and more by the week who are stepping up and saying, we support this. That the misinformation that's being spread by the corporate opposition to this bill, and it is straight up misinformation, is false. And we know that it's false in part because corporations are coming forward and saying, we're already doing this. It is implementable. We can do it. It is useful data. And these corporations are standing by what we're doing here today, and that speaks volumes. we are seeing, like I said, a lot of inaccurate information spread by the opposition. And I think we need to be very, very clear that we're not creating anything new here. Corporations have been collecting and disclosing this data for a long time. Some of the largest corporations in the world are doing so. They're doing it and they have no problem doing it, and they find it to be useful. These protocols that we're requiring in the bill are existing protocols. We're not creating anything new. This trend is happening from individual corporations. The EU is moving in this direction. We know the SEC is moving in this direction, although the same corporations who are fighting us are fighting the SEC as well and threatening to file lawsuits. So this is a multi-front battle. And in the broad political context, we need to be clear where California stands. We know that Republicans in Congress and red states are going in the opposite direction and are trying to prohibit companies from collecting this kind of data and from implementing climate action sustainability practices. And it is so essential for California to make clear that we are going in the opposite direction, that we are going to counterbalance what these red states and what the majority party in the House of Representatives are doing, and that as the fourth largest economy in the world, we are committed to strong climate action. So again, I want to thank our entire amazing coalition of environmentalists, of business organizations, of health organizations, of people who understand that we have a moral responsibility, all of us, government, corporate America, everyone, to be part of the solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Wiener. Next, we have Senator Henry Stern, who is joint author of SB 261 and SB 253.
Thank you, Catherine, and for everyone for being here today, especially my colleagues in the Assembly who are stepping up in our moment of need and I think are going to be the ones to help us get this over the finish line. But as Senator Wiener, my most trusted climate warrior and ally here, stated, the stakes aren't just in Sacramento. This isn't just a couple more climate bills being debated within the confines of California. This is a question of trillions. This is a question of where trillions are going to be invested in the years to come. And right now, last week, Jim Jordan, Dan Bishop went and threatened this coalition and our pension funds, calling them a climate cartel, subpoenaing these organizations, and essentially trying to chill and scare anyone away from this issue of climate disclosure. It's one of the number one things you hear Ron DeSantis talk about. It's the one place where MAGA lines up with big oil's interests, and people can actually just say, cover your ears, close your eyes, pretend there's not a hurricane in August, pretend there's not bomb cyclones, pretend there's no climate risk, and we'll all be fine. Just drill forever. You know, that kind of self-blinding is not just going to hurt California's economy and workers, organized labor everywhere in this state, but across this country. And when they tell you things like, we'll never know what Scope 3 emissions are, and we're asking for things that we simply can't provide you. What I say is, one person's Scope 3 is another Scope 1 and 2, in that if Amazon's out there trying to find what their supply chain partners are actually delivering, and if they're going to actually follow through on their carbon neutrality commitments, then we need to see what those partners are doing too. The $1 billion threshold here in Senator Wiener's bill and our $500 million threshold will hopefully bring to the table a diverse range of businesses. And yes, it's going to make certain industries uncomfortable. The global oil industry doesn't want you to know what the carbon footprint of Russian oil is. They don't want you to know what a utility bill is actually embedded with for Chinese steel. These are the places that I hope and implore, especially our partners in organized labor, that this is going to be a win for jobs in California when we start to tell the truth, that it's going to put our pension funds on stronger footing and not in an unlevel playing field with those who want to hide the truth, and put California in a competitive position to win this climate race. I believe we're positioned to do that. We have to pick which side we're on. Is it Kevin McCarthy's approach, this sort of anti-ESG MAGAnomics that's going to win, or are we going to win the California way? I believe we can do it the California way. Thank you for being here. Let's get it done.
Okay, Assemblymember Ash Colrad.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with my colleagues, and I stand as a proud principal co-author of the Climate Corporate Data Accountability Act once again, and I really want to thank Senator Wiener for year after year continuing to lead the charge on this ambitious bill, and I believe we will get it done this year with the coalition that we have and the partnership with the Senator Ward and others in the Assembly that are going to fight like hell for this. And that also applies to Senator Stern and the importance of SB 261. You know, time and again, we are seeing that California has demonstrated its leadership on the environment, but we know it's not enough. And we know there's more work to do, and we should be leading the charge. We should be setting the standard. As recent weather events, and we don't have to look very far here in California, but even obviously, we look at Hawaii, we look at the Canadian wildfires that are just ravaging Canada, and these unique weather events aren't a coincidence. We know that. You know, the scientists have known that for many, many years, and the polluters have even known that for many, many years. So legislation like SB 253 and 261 can really help California increase corporate accountability on their emissions and climate impacts. We place big business at the center of the climate change debate, and it really helps shift us towards a true low carbon economy driven by increased consumer awareness. Because ultimately, you know, we know that we're the fifth largest, approaching to become the fourth largest economy in the world. And we rightfully so tell our residents, our constituents, hey, be cautious about how much energy you use. Think about some solar panels. You know, turn off the light switch. Every single month, my bill shows exactly how much energy I'm using. You know, whether I'm doing a better job than last year. Can I improve upon what I'm doing as an individual? But yet, as much as we see, as was mentioned, the greenwashing of corporations when they may do a $10,000 beach cleanup and spend $5 million advertising it, saying how great they are for the environment. The reality is we need to really know what they're doing to our planet. The consumers need to know, those in the corporate C-suites need to know, the workers need to know, and I don't think it's too much for us to demand that they're held to account in a way that allows us then to follow up with policies that actually target the greatest polluters in our state and in our nation. If California does the targeting appropriately, it'll affect the global economy in a way that moves us towards combating climate change in a real way, not around the edges. The corporations would love for us to continue to work around the edges and hail them for their philanthropy when they throw a few bucks here and there. But the reality is they don't want us to see what it is they're doing to our planet, to our families, to our children. And thankfully, we have some corporations that have come forward on the right side of history, putting forth their data, putting forth the fact that they know that this can be done, holding themselves to account so that they can be better. At the end of the day, the legislators in this building, my assembly colleagues, have to decide whose side they're on. Are they on the side of these polluters that are profiting off the death of our children, our families, that's creating climate chaos? Or are they on the side of science, the side of our health, on the side of our families, on the side of our future? That's really what this comes down to. Enough is enough of allowing politics as usual and the money that flows through this building to dictate what we're going to do on policy. These courageous legislators behind me won't be swayed. And we're going to fight like hell to make sure our assembly colleagues do the right thing and get these bills passed and get it to the governor's desk. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember Colrad. Now we have Assemblymember Christopher Ward.
Thank you, Catherine. Good afternoon, Chris Ward from the 78th District in San Diego, and of course down south we know all too well the effects that we're feeling today from climate change and recognize the threats that are on the horizon for future generations. So I'm proud to support the efforts of Senator Wiener and Senator Stern in these very important bills coming before the Assembly, hopefully for a vote very soon. We need to be tracking these large-scale emissions across California. Of course, our climate crisis is causing more weather extremes in California. It's being exacerbated by some of these large-scale emissions. And to the points you heard earlier, we recognize that a lot of companies out there are already doing the right thing. Those doing business in our state, some of them are doing their part and they're reporting on that climate data, but it's on a voluntary basis, and of course not all companies are participating. Look, for us to be able to really tackle what we need to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, one, we're going to need to make sure that we're tracking all this information so that we know what's going out there and we know how to be able to help to reduce those and we can measure those reductions. But two, and more importantly, this really takes everybody. It's going to take everybody in the business community as well as individuals to step up to know what we are doing in the form of pollution and to be able to target the reductions that our state and our future desperately need. Climate change, of course, threatens our infrastructure. It affects our ability to have a great quality of life, and it affects the fourth largest economy in the world. So much is on the line. Our children's future, my kids' future, my neighbor's future is on the line. And just as a start, these bills will provide some of that much needed accountability so many of our large corporations will reduce pollution, track, and then reduce that pollution in line with what we all agree should be very aggressive climate goals here in the state of California. I look forward to these coming up to the Assembly, and I look forward to working with my colleagues to sending these to the governor's desk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Assembly Member. We are going to have a quick chant from Anissa Vasquez, and then we're going to go on to our next speaker.
All after me. Hey, California, take the lead. Climate bills are what we need.
Hey, California, take the lead. Climate bills are what we need. Hey, California, take the lead. Climate bills are what we need. Hey, California, take the lead. Climate bills are what we need.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And next we have Assembly Member Tasha Berner.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming out in the hot sun in Sacramento at the end of session, because we know it's really important to hold corporations accountable for their emissions. I mean, if we don't know what they're doing, then we can't hold anybody accountable. We don't have the transparency. And that's why I'm so proud to stand here and support Senate Bills 253 and 261. This is the bold action that we need to combat the climate crisis. And we can only mitigate what we know, right? If you don't know it, you don't know what's going on. Our neighbors don't know what's going on. The people down the street, in the schools, the families, the kids, they don't know what's going on. So these companies should be held accountable for the communities that they are polluting, and knowing the full extent of how much they're emitting is vital to protecting our future generations. California must lead the way with this legislation so that other states follow in holding corporations responsible. We know what we do here in California echoes throughout the country and throughout the world. And we need to be leading on this because we are California. And so thank you to my colleagues, the bold authors of these bills, and everybody behind me and who are probably still making their way here. And I look forward to working with all of you to make sure these bills get across the finish line. Thank you.
Lead the way, California! Tasha Berner. Okay, next we have Sarah Sachs, who's the manager of West State Policy for Ceres, a co-sponsoring organization of SB 253 and SB 261. Sarah.
Let's go, Sarah!
Hi everyone, great to be here. A lot of tall people speaking, I'm having to. All right, so yes, I'm Sarah Sachs, and again, I'm honored to be here on behalf of Ceres, a supporter and co-sponsor of both SB 253 and SB 261. Ceres is a national nonprofit that has worked for decades with influential investors, major companies, and policymakers in California and across the country to build a more sustainable economy. And right off the bat, I want to thank Senator Stern and Senator Wiener, the authors of SB 253 and 261, for their leadership on this critical issue. Give them another round of applause. Ceres believes that California has an opportunity to set a gold standard on requiring corporate climate emissions data and climate risk disclosures. Access to this information is fundamental for investors and the public discipline to understand a company's financial position in the face of the net zero transition. Because of this, many leading companies are already voluntarily reporting on climate risks and impacts. But the current voluntary reporting landscape is fragmented, incomplete, and often unverified. Mandatory disclosure is essential to providing standardized information across the economy. And in recent years, we've begun to see more companies support mandatory reporting policies. In fact, in 2021, nearly 800 companies worldwide called on leaders of G20 or Group of 20 nations to mandate corporate climate disclosures. These businesses and many of their peers understand that climate change poses a significant risk to their long-term economic success, impacts the health and prosperity of the communities in which they operate and live, and disrupts the value chains in which they rely. Climate disclosure drives good decisions and allows companies to focus on planning the monumental transition to net zero and adapting to the effects of the climate crisis, while attracting capital by giving investors confidence that companies are built for the economy of the future. SB 253 and SB 261 will level the playing field by ensuring that all major public and private companies disclose their full emissions inventory and provide detailed climate disclosures. In doing so, these bills will complement the Security and Exchange Commission, or SEC's, proposed climate disclosure rule, as well as climate data requirements emerging all around the world. In fact, we've seen 20 companies and counting taking a support stance on SB 253, including Microsoft, Patagonia, Adobe, Recology, Salesforce, IKEA USA, Sierra Nevada Growing Company, and more. And today, we actually saw the American Apparel and Footwear Association, a leading trade association representing more than 1,000 world-famous name brands, retailers, and manufacturers, announce their support of SB 253. And similarly, we see 18 companies and counting, they're growing every week, support SB 261, including Microsoft, VF Corporation, Atlassian, Patagonia, Montero Organic Estates, and more.
All right.
So you'll hear from JJ Huggins at Patagonia next to learn more about their support for both of these bills. But I just want to wrap up by saying that series of companies and investors we work with urge the State Assembly to finalize both of these bills, positioning California once again as a national economic leader by bringing standardized and consistent climate disclosure requirements to the United States. Thank you all again.
Okay, and as Sarah said, next up we have JJ Huggins, PR and Communications Manager for Patagonia.
How's everybody doing today?
It's hot.
It is hot. Patagonia, some of you may or may not know, but we are a global outdoor apparel company that has been headquartered down in Ventura, California since our founding 50 years ago. We are pleased to support Senate Bills 253 and 261. California is not only one of the largest economies in the world, it's a leader on environmental policy. The standards we set here can positively influence behavior in other states and other countries. Patagonia, similar to many of the like-minded companies that Sarah mentioned, already tracks greenhouse gas emissions for our scopes 1, 2, and 3. We rely on the insights from the greenhouse gas emissions data because it helps us identify new methods for reducing our footprint. But voluntary actions from a handful of companies trying to be responsible is not enough. We need state leaders to enact and enforce regulatory standards mandating all companies to measure greenhouse gas emissions and disclose risks associated with climate change in a consistent manner. Because finding solutions to the climate and ecological crisis requires good data. It's especially important for businesses to analyze and disclose their Scope 3 data, because that covers supply chains. That's where for most industries, that's where the bulk of our emissions comes from, is the Scope 3 data. At Patagonia, 95% of our emissions comes from our supply chain. 87% of that comes from our raw materials manufacturing. By measuring this, Because we understand the damage we cause to the planet, we are taking responsibility for that, and we are radically cutting our pollution by transforming how we make products and work with supply chain partners. We are committing to science-based emissions reduction targets that are aligned with keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. If SB 253 and SB 261 are signed into law, big companies will not only learn more about their supply chain emissions and climate risks, their leaders can be held accountable for the mess they create. I want to thank Senators Stern and Wiener and the Assembly members gathered here today. And I want to thank Ceres for their thought leadership, guidance, and expertise. And I want to thank Persephone for organizing this rally. I hope more companies, especially the major emitters in our state, along with voters, investors, and customers, will hear us today and join us in supporting these bills. As the conservationist David Brower has said, there's no business to be done on a dead planet. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, JJ. Okay, our last two speakers, but not least, are two co-sponsoring organizations. Melissa Romero, Senior Legislative Manager at California Environmental Voters, and as I said, a co-sponsor of SB 253.
Hello, everyone. When I say climate, you say action. Climate.
Action.
Climate.
Action.
Thank you. I know it's hot, so I'll be quick. Melissa Romero with California Environmental Voters. My organization is in the business of changing what's politically possible on climate and demanding bold climate action. Why? Because we have no other choice. Our lives are at stake. Our children and our grandchildren's lives are at stake. And we take that seriously. And that's why we're sponsoring SB 253. And that's why we're a proud supporter of SB 261. These are the top climate bills this year. So I want everyone to be paying attention to what happens in the next several weeks. I want to thank Senator Wiener and Senator Stern and all the legislators who are here today and who are signed on in support of this bill for not backing down in this fight. We believe that corporate accountability and corporate leadership are the keys to solving the climate crisis at scale. We have to recognize that for some polluters, we do have to mandate change. And for corporations who are leading on sustainability, we have to uplift and encourage that good behavior and that leadership. California communities are facing the brunt of the climate crisis today. From raging wildfires to a literal hurricane hitting Southern California to extensive droughts, flooding, toxic air and water pollution that is literally shortening the lives of our children and our parents. We are in the midst of the crisis of our generation, and the responsibility to address this crisis has been disproportionately thrust upon individual citizens and upon communities that don't have the resources to push back, despite the considerable role that corporations play in contributing to emissions. SB 253 offers a pathway to holding corporations accountable and pushing them and urging them to partake in as much of the needed changes as they can. SB 261 is going to ensure that corporations are planning ahead for the risks of climate change and also for the opportunities to be part of the solution, which in turn protects all of us who rely so heavily on the decisions that large corporations make. So through these bills, we can achieve accurate and comprehensive understanding of corporate climate emissions, often underestimated due to overlooked supply chain emissions. And this level of transparency is the essential first step in tackling the colossal challenge of the climate crisis on a global scale. We know that with greater transparency comes real action, not words. We're calling on the legislature to pass SB 253 and SB 261 and to show the rest of the country and the world what climate leadership looks like. Thank you.
Okay, and batting cleanup is Melanie Morelos, California Strategy Senior Program Manager from the Greenlighting Institute and organizational co-sponsor of SB 253.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Melanie Morelos with the Greenlighting Institute. We are proud co-sponsors of SB 253 and proud supporters of SB 261. We are a nonprofit organization that works towards a future where communities of color can build wealth, live in healthy places filled with economic opportunity, and are ready to meet the challenges posed by climate change. At Greenlining, we work in consultation with community-based organizations on the front lines of climate change to ensure that their concerns and their demands are prioritized by policymakers. SB 253 is important to us because the effects of greenhouse gas emissions and our rapidly changing climate are felt more acutely by low-income communities and communities of color. These communities are more likely to experience climate-related impacts like flooding, wildfires, and extreme heat, and with less resources to prepare for and withstand these climate catastrophes that are becoming more frequent. They are also far more likely to be living in areas exposed to excessive emissions, contributing to poor health outcomes than wealthier white communities. Creating solutions to climate change for low-income communities and communities of color requires unlocking the potential of the private sector to drive meaningful change, as well as holding businesses accountable for their impact on our climate. This bill takes a thoughtful approach to making such information more transparent by requiring these disclosures. Small businesses and farms are not burdened with these requirements to calculate and report emissions. There will be proxies and other mechanisms in place for this. Additionally, companies have plenty of time until 2027 to report these Scope 3 emissions, providing plenty of time to adjust if they're signed into law. We know that many businesses are already calculating Scope 3 emissions and should be well on their way to meeting this requirement. This bill will ensure that the public, including investors, policymakers, and community residents, would have critical information on how our state's biggest companies are contributing to the climate crisis. Simply put, we cannot manage what we cannot measure. Companies cannot make informed decisions on how to address the climate crisis without accurate data on who and what is contributing to it. SB 253 provides a critical path forward for corporations to support California's climate leadership. I'd like to thank Senator Wiener and a lot of the legislators behind me for their good work, our co-sponsors, and we hope to pass this historic legislation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and a big round of applause for all the speakers that are here and the ones that have left. Thank you so much for the work you've done and the work you're going to do in the next couple of weeks. With that, are there questions from the press in the audience? We can also do one-on-ones after we break up. We are going to be doing some impromptu advocacy and office visiting after this, so stick around. So any hands there? Anybody want to ask a question from the stage? I will then let these folks come down and mingle with you. Thank you again for all your work.
It's like a water before you pass out.